Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Affordable Rental Housing Development Funding Calendar and Frameworks conversation here. I will be presenting along with Amy Cole. For those that don't know me, I am Natasha Detweiler-Davy. I work at the state's Housing Finance Agency, Oregon Housing and Community Services, and the Assistant Director for Planning and Policy in our Affordable Rental Housing Division. And Amy, if you want to introduce yourself as well.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Amy Cole, also from the Oregon Housing and Community Services, and I am the State Development Resources Manager there. So work closely with Natasha in the Affordable Rental Housing Division.
Great. So thank you all for attending today. We are here for really a kind of a real-time check-in, share information that we are putting together for our next 2-year funding calendar. So presenting where we are going with all of our funding for the next 2 years, as well as to solicit any input that you might have to share and answer questions along those lines. I guess first I'll just say that we have this is a relatively new process for us. This will be our second 2-year funding calendar that we are developing. The state is on you might know, a biennial funding cadence, and so as we come out of the 2021 legislative session with our legislatively appropriated resources for affordable housing development funds, we work to essentially forecast forward over the next 2 years when and how we will offer those resources. And so part of that process has been we kicked off our efforts with a stakeholder survey, launched into engagements in September, or Thursdays in September. We held 9 different sessions on focused topic areas, and tracked feedback along those along all of that to inform how we put together both the funding that we'll be offering, as the timing for all of those resources, as well as kind of what program tweaks we are making or changing around our frameworks, which is what we really call the guiding principles when we're doing competitive funding or non-competitive funding. What what are the tenets, what are the frames that we put around those resources? And I was just going to ask Trinity from OHCS if you can post the link to that engagement website. That might be something that people want to see. So I'm going to kick us off here talking about our equity and racial justice considerations across all of our funding. How we are looking to increase transparency and how we're looking to costs across our different funding programs. And then Amy will walk us through the funding calendar and the individual program frameworks. And I guess, and part of all of this is also trying to think. So as we present, we do have a retro board for capturing information from you all if you have feedback or on the kind of direction that we're heading. And so I think that in the chat you'll see, I guess the other thing in the chat that I forgot to mention is I believe that they've posted a link to the materials that we'll be covering here. But yes, you can then share the comments through that easy retro board link. Okay, so I'm going to kick it off with equity and racial justice considerations. This is a place where, as a state agency, we have really taken on as a significant part of our 5-year statewide housing plan to further equity and racial justice considerations across all of our programmatic areas, including housing. And so we've broken up this topic into kind of 5 different areas of where we see that our housing resources touch equity and racial justice, and with each are trying to increase the degree to which we are proactive, look to prioritize equity and racial justice, and have increased measurability. And so just an explanation of the chart is we tried to put this into more of a visual about where we've been and where we're coming. The size of the dot is a reference to how measurable that is. And then you kind of can gauge it against those two different lines. So for commitments to organizational equity work, and this is where we're thinking about from the perspective of we want to make sure that the organizations we fund are organizations that are taking equity and racial justice to heart and to implementing practices at their own organizations to further that work. In the past, we've required organizations that apply for resources to sign what we've called a DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion agreement that just gives basically a broad list of items that they're committing to do organizational equity work. It hasn't been measurable or trackable. And so while we want to keep that agreement moving forward, we're going to really have that agreement be between our OHCS agency as a whole and that sponsor, versus it be just a form that's submitted as part of the funding application. We want to make sure that there's some kind of reporting about what you've taken on and what you've done in the past year, or what you plan to do moving forward, and that our sponsors also engage with us in collaborative conversations towards shared understanding each year. Then we have culturally specific engagement to support tenants. We are trying again to move to a place where we're again more specific, more aligned. And so we do have right now currently services, prescription within our funding opportunities that services and outreach have to align with the communities that are being served. But we want to take that a little bit further and have layer within there more specific and deliberate definitions around, are you a culturally specific organization, or are you a culturally responsive organization? And then scaling criteria that are really relative to what type of organization you are, so that it is a little bit more meaningful and able to be tracked back. Emphasis on including, again, funding for services. We do in Oregon allow funding of resident services from project operations funds. So that's something that we would want to see, with the caveat that we understand the funding from rural development doesn't allow you to do that. And then are also looking to do more deliberate linkages between our capacity building resources with equity and racial justice across the board. And then in terms of actual work with culturally specific and responsive organizations, we are expanding, just having that be part of the conceptual frame of a project to be aligned to use set-asides and enhanced scoring to give deliberate preference and room for culturally specific sponsors to participate and gain access to resources. And again, further alignment with capacity resources to understand as we are continue to work toward expanding the work, this is having a really direct impact on these organizations. And so we want to understand where those organizations need capacity support to ensure that they can respond to the demand for their time and effort. And then, affirmative fair housing marketing is obviously a federal HUD standard. This is something that we require for all of our projects, regardless of where the funding comes from. But to that vein, we haven't done deliberate outcome tracking from affirmative fair housing marketing efforts. And so one of the things that we want to do with projects moving forward is to say, after you lease up, let's look at your demographics, let's evaluate how you did, let's see what kinds of best practices we might be able to discern from those efforts. So again, starting out as a reporting, we're not starting out as a punitive. And let's see, MWSB contractors and subcontractors, we have used over the years have done a lot to establish first starting out as we encourage you to use MWSB contractors. Let's talk about how you're planning to outreach, to now actually implementing targets, reported structured data reporting, and moving forward, we want to be looking toward expanding the capacity of MWSB firms to become COVID certified across the state. There is a barrier to that, so we want to make sure that we can be stepping in to help out with that. And so that's really, those are the pieces of equity and racial justice. And then the next thing I was going to talk about is how we can work to increase transparency of our competitive funding processes. This is something that is, I would say, an evolving effort, continuously trying to make sure that we are clear about our expectations, and that when projects get funded or don't get funded, that it's not a surprise in one way or another. In 2019, I believe, we implemented electronic applications, and with that process, we added a pre-application within it. But we, throughout our outreach around the funding calendar, heard that the pre-application is fine. It's not a barrier, but it's not really providing good insight to sponsors about whether or not you would be competitive through our funding process. And so one of the things that we're aiming to do moving forward is to build more time into our process for that pre-application, for there to be a little bit more data that's reported out from that process, as well as an opportunity for the potential applicant to actually talk with staff before our open competitive process starts. We have always held each individual project scores confidentially. That's not something that we share. We share with you your scores and how you did. But we heard a clear call from sponsors that they wanted us to be sharing all of the detailed scores for all projects. And so moving forward, that's where we'll be going. And I think that's those are the main things. Again, in addition to just general updates to our documentation, so that we have a little bit better clarity around what that process looks like. And then lastly, cost escalation. A lot of our funding sources require that we put a funding cap, so limit it per bedroom or per unit investment of these resources. We have experienced in our recent funding awards a lot of cost volatility that kind of has put projects outside of any kind of default anticipated escalation of construction costs. And so we have overall inflated those limits around 15%, and have requested along those lines that there is some increased flexibility if we find that is insufficient to meet the need. We are, for a lot of resources, have requirements around prioritizing lesser subsidy. I will say that that is something that was really critical for our legislature, a few years ago, and it's seeming less and less critical as there's a better understanding about the cost of meeting all of these really diverse policy requirements. And so that's really the part that I was going to add to. Again, if you can be adding any comments or feedback on these, on that easy retro board. If you have questions that you'd like us to talk about in real time, please just post them to chat and we can either talk to them as we go or at the end. And then I will hand it to Amy to talk about funding, calendar, and framework.
Thanks, Natasha. And you're still doing the slides, right? Okay. So now we're going to talk about our proposed funding calendar and NOFA framework. So we'll be talking about changes that we're proposing for this current biennium. And we'll go framework by framework so that you have a chance to see what our changes, what we're proposing for each. And there are columns on the Easy Retro board for each framework so that you can give us your feedback there. And as Natasha said, please put any questions in the chat so that we can answer them in real time. We really do appreciate any feedback you have for us, and do take all of the comments that end up on the Easy Retro, and we take them for sure under advisement as we're working toward our final of this. So anyway, here we go. We have the slide that you're looking at right now is our current version of and our proposed version of the funding calendar. So you'll see that the fund offerings are listed on the left side. We have split many of the funds between 2022 and 2023. So that is in those next two columns, that's laid out. And then we show when the offerings will be made. So when we'll be releasing NOFAs for 2022 and 23, and the approximate time for our funding decisions. So with all of that information, and all of this is on our website, and we have also, as Natasha mentioned, presented to Housing Stability Council. So it's all there. Thank you so much. And if you take a look in the chat, the presentation materials are there as well. There's a link to them. That was just posted by our tech support, Golly. So thank you. All right, let's start it, Natasha. All right, we're starting with LIFT. As people know, we received a much larger amount of LIFT money than we have in the past. So if you take a look at the top of this slide, it tells you what we plan to use the LIFT resources for, and when we expect those offerings to go out. So as in the past, we'll have a LIFT rental NOFA each year and a LIFT homeownership NOFA each year. You'll see that we split the so for the first year, we split the amount of funding between the regular LIFT NOFA and some wildfire direct awards to help with recovery for wildfire impacted communities. We'll have a LIFT homeownership NOFA and a LIFT homeownership wildfire direct awards as well. So for the first year, the amount of funding that we're putting out is split between a regular NOFA and wildfire direct awards for both rental and homeownership. And then the second year, we're doing traditional, just the regular NOFA for rental and homeownership. And you'll see they're much larger the second year. So we're planning to use the same calendar that we have, where the NOFAs go out in January and awards are usually in June or July, maybe August, depending on how many applications we get in. The changes that we're proposing are an expansion of geographic set-asides. We've always had urban and rural, but now we are looking to add a small urban. So that would be areas that are in MSAs outside the Portland metro area. We feel like that might make it easier to compete for projects that are in some of those smaller urban areas. We have that we're also looking at a 15% set aside across the entire amount of lift for culturally specific developers. And we are also looking to clarify that lift homeownership can be used for new manufactured home parks. So that's lift. And of course, we would like your input on any and all of the proposed changes. All right, permanent supportive housing. This program is newer. We were first funded with it in the last biennium. So we don't have tons of changes, but they do affect people who are applying. So we are looking at January fund openings for this NOFA as well. And when we first started with this program, we were kind of under a time crunch and had to do the institute, our training and technical assistance requirement for accessing the PSH funds almost at the same time that we did the NOFA. And the second time, for the second year, it was pretty similar timeline. We were able to expand it a little bit, but we have heard that does not work especially well for teams who are going through the institute and taking that time to learn all of the information that is coming to them and then having to apply at the same time that they're going through the institute. So we are proposing to move the institute to the spring so that there's plenty of time between when the institute ends to work on an application before the NOFA opens in January the following year. And we are also looking at expanding the eligibility for applying to the NOFA for not only teams that have been through the institute altogether, but to allow developers who have been through the institute to apply for the funds and go through the Corporation for Supportive Housing's quality endorsement. So yeah, so those are the changes. Thank you, Natasha. For the Veterans NOFA, pretty much what everyone is used to. Application or NOFA is opening up in the summer, both years, and looking at using veterans for new construction and or conversion of existing non-residential units. We are not currently doing preservation with the Veterans NOFA. Just letting people know that we haven't in the past, and we're not planning to going forward. And also we're looking at adding a consideration in the NOFA for family-sized units. All right, agricultural workforce housing tax credit. So you'll see that we are actually proposing a little bit of a different cadence for this one in this biennium. So currently we are working off a first come, first serve model for community credits, or for on-farm, sorry, credits. In 2022, we're thinking about going to first come, first serve for both on-farm and community set-asides of credits. And then if those resources are not fully subscribed by September 2022, the credits will roll over to 2023 and be included in the small projects NOFA. And the small projects NOFA is offered once a biennium in the second year of the biennium. So that lines up really well. And then if all the credits are not used on that first come, first serve basis, they can be accessed through the small projects NOFA. And we will require that there is some level of readiness to proceed for the community set aside, just because we would like projects to be ready to go. And in the past, sometimes we've had applicants hold the credits for over a number of years before starting the project. So anyway, that will be a little bit of a change from past years. In 2023, the on-farm resources are the only ones that will be first come, first serve. So just to recap, first come, first serve in 2022 for on-farm and community, and then any that are not fully subscribed there will go into the 2023 small project NOFA. In 2023, the on-farm will be first come, first serve only. Okay. Next. Small projects NOFA, not too many changes here. As I mentioned in the slide before, once a biennium is when this is offered, and may or may not include ag worker housing tax credits, depending on the first come, first serve approach. And as a reminder, small projects are now 40 units or fewer. Land acquisition. We did receive quite a bit more funding for this program this year, and we are looking at opening the NOFA, or I guess it's actually not a NOFA, the application process, because this is on a first come, first serve basis in January 2022. And as in the past, there will be urban and rural regional set-asides and 90% loan to value. And we will be looking at, we'll be holding the funds for home ownership versus rental for the first 6 months. And then in set-asides for the first 6 months. And then if that funding isn't used, it'll go to rental. All right, preservation. We also received quite a bit more money than we have in the past for preservation. So we have some different proposals for that. We are looking at a preservation pool, which would open on a first come, first serve basis in January. We are looking at staggering these offerings so that they're not all available at the same time. We're looking at prioritizing support for expiring projects that are being sold, and that supports our PUSH initiative and other preservation initiatives. And we're looking to support preservation and redevelopment projects that add units, and manufactured home park preservation as we have in the past. And for our preservation NOFA that is going to open in September 2022, 30% will be for federal rent-assisted projects at risk of expiration, 40% for portfolio projects at risk of expiration, and 30% for physical condition at risk of loss. So that's what we are proposing here. All right, home. So we did in 2021 have a home NOFA that focused on that prioritized and only funded preservation and had a minimum request of $500,000. We are proposing for the next biennium to offer home with the 9% low-income housing tax credit offering, and that funding will be able to be used for projects in the balance of state and for new construction. So it will not be restricted to preservation. And the minimum request will be $1 million. So we're upping that minimum in this biennium. Okay, qualified allocation plan. Natasha, feel free to jump in if I don't do this justice, because I will be the first to admit I am not an expert at low-income housing tax credits, but I'm happy to be here and challenging myself to present this slide. All right, so currently we have set-asides in the QAP qualified allocation plan, and the set-asides are 10% for projects on tribal lands, 25% for preservation, and 65% go to regions that are noted here: metro counties, non-metro, home participating jurisdictions, the balance of state urban and balance of state rural. Changes we are proposing are set aside adjustments. So 10% set aside for culturally specific development partners. And this would reduce the regional set aside by 10 percentage points. We would also revise the regional pools to look at metro, mid-sized, urban, and rural. And we would make updates to the scoring rubric for various points categories, which would be the LIHTC effectiveness category, cost effectiveness, development team performance, and partnership.
Yeah, that was great. I did there's not a lot of questions in the chat, but there is one around whether we're looking to take any actions regarding year 15 disputes and predatory lenders around the right of first refusal on tax credit properties. And I do know I haven't seen the draft adjustments at this point. I think it sounds like our redlined draft QAP update is planning to be released on the 18th of October. But I do know that there was extensive work by preservation work groups in Oregon to provide us with very detailed feedback about some of these key improvements that needed to be made, including recommendations around language around these aggregators. What I understand is that we do have some existing language in our QAP that deters aggregators, as well as a high percentage of our projects that are 100% affordable, which is generally also a deterrent. But I think there was some proposed revisions around adding more constraints to projects that are older and approaching the 15-year mark. So I think that we will see some reflection on that as well. And let's see, can we give me some specifics about the changes in the scoring rubric around, so for all around LIHTC and cost efficiencies? I'm trying to think. Mitch, are you on? Would you be able to speak to those specific changes that they're looking to contemplate? Sorry to put you on the spot. No, maybe he's not. Okay, so I know that there's a lot of interest in around the changes in the scoring rubric to what? Oh, that's a different question. So I'm going to jump to the LIHTC effectiveness differ from leveraging sources, and I think it is really a way to it's like a tax credit per unit. How much tax credit per what are you getting with each of the tax credit investment dollars? And I think that that it really is a way to signal to, so projects that are able to leverage other resources are going to get a better, need lesser tax credits per unit or per bedroom. And that's part of really the importance of the regions that we apply in terms of the larger metro areas having more resources within their communities to commit to affordable housing versus those smaller communities. And so that, I think that's a big consideration in reflection upon the proposed adjustments to look at jurisdictions based mostly on size versus having really it separated out by a balance of state and then subsections between there. And I think a lot of the pushback that we've gotten is around that that factor and wanting to make sure that it's really meaningful.
And Natasha, you were asking about the scoring rubric, right?
Yes, yes.
So I think some of the changes that are thinking about being made are more around, they're still in development, of course, but mostly right now it's sort of just the, I guess, amplitude of points, like what value and weight we're giving specific criteria that we've already kind of called out in the NOFAs in the past, but also trying to take a closer look, I think, at differences in urban, rural, and ways that we can kind of better delineate what the expectations would be between those two, and allow partners to kind of have better expectations going into a NOFA application as to what their project would score and what it would look like. Not a great answer. We're still working on it, I guess, is the gist, but yeah.
Yeah, and again, and there is no, and to the point of how is LIHTC effectiveness different from leveraging sources? There is no point specific to leveraging sources, and so it's really in exchange for and for preservation funds, the 9% program has a 25% set aside for preservations of projects with federal 25% or more federal rent assisted units, either from HUD or RD. And so that's where it has a set aside, it's eligible. 4% absolutely. We have, as Amy referenced, we have $100 million investment from the state towards preservation, and anticipate that the bulk of those resources will leverage the 4% program, as well as using that gap source. And let's see, I see Mike Andrews is asking around the size criteria for mid-size and urban. And I do believe that we're looking to align those kind of what those thresholds are across the various ones that will be updated, so we wouldn't have different definitions across the NOFAs for those. And Amy, I don't know if you want to speak, if you see this question on Lyft.
I do.
Yeah.
I do see that, and I think we're still working that out. I don't have definite a definite answer for that, but we're working on it, and it'll be done soon.
Yeah, and
thank you for that. We are considering how to do it and working with our research team, and yeah. So.
Yeah, and if thoughts or recommendations, again, please go to that retro board and you'll be able to add information in as for feedback that we will relay to both program and research that are working through those issues. Okay. I think that was it for our PowerPoint. So are there other questions that folks have in mind that we can talk about? Doesn't look like anybody's putting in any information on the retro board. Yes, so this PowerPoint, I believe if you go to, there's a presentation materials link that Gally had posted in this chat. And you can find these materials there. Oh, just did it again. Okay, so Molly, I see you're asking how you will resolve a first come, first serve on preservation with applying preferences for expiring contracts or regulatory agreements. So we have more detail. We actually have a preservation session at 10:30 today where we'll do a deeper dive into all of these. But so within the preservation, within this competitive preservation offering, the idea is that we're separating out those resources to 3 different risk buckets. So one is for federal rent assisted that are at risk of loss for expiry reasons. So those would have part of the prioritization would be derived from when, are you 3 years from expiry or 5 years or 7 years or more? And then another bucket is the other affordable at risk of expiration. So those would be, tax credit and any other non-rent assisted projects. And then we will have another 30% of those resources held for those that have physical condition risk of loss. And this is these are really, again, these are the 3 primary buckets for affordable rental housing preservation. And so that physical condition risk of loss would be projects that aren't at risk because they're going to expire in 5 or 10 years, but that they are having major system failures and need significant rehab in order to retain them and address health safety concerns. We do have in the preservation $20 million called out for a preservation pool resource, and that the idea of that pool is really based, really extensively on stakeholder feedback around how these resources could best address kind of the low-hanging fruit in terms of significant rehab needs or lesser rehab needs that are needed as you are extending affordability or needing to do re-syndication. And so I think at this point, our framework proposes that that's a 10,000 per unit cap. So it's really modest, right? But you need to demonstrate that with that $10,000 and 4% and maybe our Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit, that you would be able to address any health safety concerns and extend affordability to your project. If those resources aren't utilized within that pool by February 2023, then those would be allocated through that main preservation NOFA. The other $10 million pool there, which is the preservation push pool resources, like PEAS. Push is our publicly supported housing regulations, which it's really a complex structure of regulations around public noticing and providing opportunity to purchase projects that are going to expire and otherwise opt out of extended affordability. And it gives both local jurisdictions like your housing authority rights of first refusal to purchase that property, as well as the state. And so where the local jurisdiction isn't using their rights, OHCS has the ability to establish a designee to operate and use that right of first refusal on our behalf. And so while we so we were able to carve out $10 million to offer through that process to go in to be offered to projects that are using those rights established through that those push regulations to be able to help in processing or stabilizing that portfolio. And how that looks is still emerging, but we plan to have all of that. And one of the all of these preservation resources aren't going to go in as loans. They won't, with no interest, no payments aside from if there are cash flow payments that need to be made.
And just also to let everyone know that at 10:30 there's Natasha and I and Martin will all be at a preservation session that will go into greater detail about all of our proposed preservation approaches. So if you have time and would like to be there, that would be great. We will be happy to see you at 10:30 for even more preservation talk.
Yay. Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, in general, to Molly's question, I would say, we're using set asides, we'll use scoring that prioritizes within that expiries, um, and also using the set aside to address the idea that there's still really this other group of needs around physical condition. And one of the things that we did try to clarify or try to simplify within this funding calendar is what the path is for preservation projects. And so we're really trying to pull it into a central offering. There is the ability to use these pool resources before this main competitive NOFA happens. You're going to use the 9% if you're federal rent assisted. And then others, we need to make space in this NOFA for projects of different sizes. Make sure that the 20 or 30 unit project that doesn't have somebody else to another project to be a group portfolio funded are able to compete and find space and scoring that's tailored to them within there. Any other questions, concerns?
Well, with no one saying they have any concerns, you completed with the presentation.
We can always give the gift of time.
All right, we want to thank our panel, Amy and Natasha of OHCS today, with no more information to share from them and no more comments in the chat. We wish you all a wonderful day. Reminder, don't forget to complete the workshop evaluation that's posted in the chat room. And we'll see you in other workshops the rest of the day. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.